Can looking back at history, and I mean way back, tens of thousands of years, really tell us if civilization is, teetering on the edge? Or, maybe more hopefully, can it show us how to thrive, how to build a better future? Today, we're diving deep into this really fascinating book that tackles exactly these huge questions. It's Ian Morris's Why the West Rules for Now, subtitled The Patterns of History and What They Reveal About the Future. And wow, it takes a sweeping look at pretty much the whole human journey. So our mission here is to unpack Morris's approach, which is really unique, very data-driven, comparing East and West. We want to understand the big historical forces he talks about, and then wrestle with his, frankly, bold predictions for what's coming, both the good and the potentially really bad.
Yeah, it really makes you think of that Churchill quote Morris uses, doesn't it? The farther backward you can look, the farther forward you're likely to see. Morris takes it super seriously. He goes back millennia, not just a few centuries like most historians might. He gives you this incredible long view.
Okay, let's get into it then, because the ambition here is just massive. How on earth do you even start comparing the development of whole civilizations over thousands of years? It sounds, well, impossible, right? It's like comparing completely different things. How do you quantify that?
It absolutely sounds impossible. But that's where Morris gets really creative. He actually developed a mathematical metric, an index, to score social development levels. So he takes these sort of vague ideas about progress and turns them into something, well, quantitative, comparable, at least according to his system.
Right, he puts a number on it. Okay, so how does he build this index? I remember reading there were 4 key factors, and maybe not the ones you'd immediately expect, each worth 250 points.
Exactly. 4 pillars, each contributing equally to a potential top score of 1,000. And yeah, they are quite specific. First, there's energy capture. Basically, how much energy a society can grab and use from muscle power right up to, nuclear and fossil fuels. Second is urbanism, which isn't just about city size, but how well a society organizes itself economically in cities, uses resources efficiently. Third is information processing. Think everything from the very first scratchings that look like writing, all the way up to the internet, how societies handle information. And the fourth one, which sometimes raises eyebrows, is the capacity to launch war. Morris sees this as a kind of proxy for organizational strength, tech level, the ability to mobilize resources and project power.
Wow. Energy, cities, information, and war making. That's quite the definition of development. And he needed a baseline, right? A reference point.
He did. He set New York City in the year 2000 as the benchmark. That gets a score of 1,000 points on his index.
Okay, so everything else is measured against NYC in 2000. And the time scale he covers is just immense. He starts way back, 14,000 BC. End of the last ice age.
Yeah, that's right. Just as things started warming up, agriculture was becoming possible, sort of the dawn of what we might call civilization, all the way up to 2000 AD. So, yeah, 16,000 years.
It's a huge sweep. Now, how does he define these massive concepts east and west? Because that's not always straightforward geographically.
No, it's not. And his definitions are based on the origins of the core civilizations. For the West, he traces it back to the hilly flanks in western Eurasia, the Tigris, Euphrates, Jordan valleys, then expanding out Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Med, Europe, and eventually the Americas, Australia, New Zealand, even Siberia. It becomes this vast interconnected zone. For the East, the origin point is ancient China, specifically the Yellow River Basin. And from that core, it expands to include places like Japan, Korea, the Indochina Peninsula. China remains the center for most of its history.
And these centers weren't fixed either, were they? I found that part really fascinating, how the hotspot of development moved within both East and West.
Absolutely crucial point. For the West, the most developed region, the core, was around the Eastern Mediterranean, Iraq, Egypt, Greece for thousands of years, right up until about 1400 AD. Then it shifts. Northwest through Italy, then France, Britain, and eventually, boom, across the Atlantic to North America by the 1900s.
And the East.
The East center stayed pretty stable for a long, long time, basically in the Yellow and Yangtze River regions right up until about 1850. Then it briefly jumps to Japan in the 1900s during their rapid industrialization before shifting back towards southeastern China by the year 2000. So yeah, these are really dynamic concepts.
Okay, so let's look at the early race then. Back near the beginning, 14,000 BC to maybe 11 BC. Who got started faster according to his index?
Well, based on those pillars, the West had a slight edge initially, particularly with agriculture. In the hilly flanks, you see rye being cultivated super early, maybe around 11,000 BC, then definitely by 9,600 BC. In the East, rice farming in the Yangtze starts maybe 8,000 to 7,500 BC, and millet in the Yellow River Valley around 6,500 BC, so a bit later.
And information.
Similar story. The West seems to have had some kind of primitive notation or proto-writing by 9000 BC. In the East, clear evidence comes later, after 7000 BC, leading up to the Shang dynasty script.
So the foundations, agriculture, and information seem to appear a bit earlier in the West. What about cities and states, the next level of organization?
Right. Building on that agricultural base, you get Uruk in Mesopotamia, emerging around 3300 BC, pretty clearly a city, then a state. And ancient Egypt forms around 3100 BC, a massive kingdom for its time. In the east, the earliest known comparable site is Urartu, likely the Shia dynasty capital, dating between 1900 and 1700 BC. So, again, a bit of a later start according to the archaeological record Morris uses.
So the West led early on, but you mentioned the index shows this amazing back and forth. When did things change?
Yeah, the charts in the book visualizing this are really striking. The West leads pretty consistently up until 541 AD. Then, around that time, which corresponds to the chaotic northern and southern dynasties period in China, interestingly, but also recovery and innovation, the East actually pulls ahead.
Wow, so the East leads from the 6th century for how long?
For over 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Right up until 1773 AD, deep into China's Qing dynasty.
Over a millennium of Eastern leadership and development, according to this index, that really challenges some common Western perspectives.
It absolutely does. And then, around 1773, the West surges ahead again, largely driven by the Industrial Revolution kicking off in Britain. And the West has been leading ever since, up to the year 2000, when the main study ends.
This brings us to that really interesting concept you mentioned earlier, the paradox of social development, the idea that success breeds failure almost.
Exactly. It's like there's this invisible ceiling. Morris argues that periods of rapid development, rapid increases in energy capture, population complexity, they often create the very conditions for a later downturn. Resource depletion, environmental problems, maybe social unrest, disease outbreaks linked to density, becoming too complex to manage.
So getting ahead actually makes you more vulnerable in some ways. It's not a straight line out.
Not at all. History is full of these cycles. Civilizations hit these ceilings, maybe stagnate, sometimes collapse, until maybe new technologies or new ways of organizing society allow them to break through again, only to potentially hit another ceiling later. It's a fundamental dynamic in his view.
That's a really powerful lens for looking at history. Okay, so that leads us to the book's big question. Why does the West rule now? If the East led for over 1,200 years, why the switch back in the 18th century?
Morris ties it fundamentally to geography, but not in a simple, deterministic way.
Right. It's not just Europe had better geography. It's more dynamic than that, isn't it? You mentioned how development changes what geography means.
Precisely. That's the key insight, I think. Geography's importance isn't fixed. It changes based on technology and social organization. Think about Mesopotamia again. Initially, those river valleys were marshy, flood-prone, difficult, not obviously good geography, but human ingenuity irrigation canals turned that difficult geography into an incredibly productive agricultural heartland. That geographical potential was unlocked by development.
And the Western Europe example?
Perfect counterpoint. For millennia, being on the Atlantic coast of Europe was a disadvantage. It was far from the action in the Mediterranean and the Near East, a real backwater. But then, around the 15th, 16th centuries, new shipbuilding technology, caravels, galleons, able to handle the Atlantic winds and currents, suddenly turns that location into a massive advantage. It opened up the Americas, the Atlantic trade routes. That geographic disadvantage became the launch pad for global dominance and eventually the Industrial Revolution. The meaning of the Atlantic changed completely.
So technology and development literally redrew the map in terms of strategic importance. That's fascinating.
And that Industrial Revolution, starting in Britain, powered the West's surge past the East after 1773.
And that leads into the more recent shifts. The book also talks about the U.S. rising, right, and then China's resurgence.
Yes, absolutely. He traces how the U.S. starts challenging Western Europe's dominance around 1900. After the World Wars, the U.S. clearly emerges as the new core of the West, the global hegemon. Power shifts across the Atlantic. And then more recently, you have the incredible story of China's rise, especially after the reforms began in 1978. The speed is just staggering. Morris points out, in the 1970s, U.S. productivity was maybe 20 times China's. By 2000, that gap had shrunk dramatically, maybe only 7 times.
Wow.
And China's share of global commodity consumption shot up from like 5% to 14% in that period. It's a profound shift in the global balance.
Okay, so based on these long-term patterns, these cycles, the changing meaning of geography, What does Morris predict next? He makes a pretty specific call, doesn't he?
He does. It's quite bold. He projects that this trend will continue and that the East, primarily driven by China, will overtake the West again in terms of social development, and he puts a date on it, 2103.
2103, so within the lifetime of children born today. And he predicts the development index score could go way up, like 5,000 points, compared to 1,000 for NYC in 2000.
Exactly. A five-fold increase in that development score.
What does a world scoring 5,000 even look like? That sounds like pure science fiction.
It does. Morris sketches out possibilities based on extrapolating those trends in energy, information, etc. Think megacities, maybe 140 million people. Energy consumption on a scale that just dwarfs today's. And yeah, technologies that sound like sci-fi now, advanced genetic engineering, maybe bionics becoming commonplace, an incredibly advanced, interconnected world.
But there's always a but, isn't there? Especially with that paradox of development idea looming. This incredible peak comes with incredible risks.
That's the dark flip side. Morris argues that reaching such a high level of development inevitably pushes humanity right up against potentially catastrophic global crises. That invisible ceiling, but on a planetary scale.
What kind of crises are we talking about, the big ones?
The biggest ones, yes. First, climate change. He cites projections, this was written over a decade ago, remember, but projections of maybe a 20% hit to global GDP by 2100, melting ice caps, rising seas, mass famine. He talks about the potential for 200 million climate refugees trying to move to places like Europe and the US. The destabilization would be immense.
And not just climate.
No.
Yeah.
He also points to plagues. History shows a strong link between mass migrations, dense populations, global interconnectedness, and the spread of devastating diseases. Think the Black Death, 1918 flu, AIDS, H1N1. Greater density and movement equals greater risk. And third, political instability. The collapse of fragile states, he mentions places like Afghanistan, Somalia as examples leading to chaos, failed states becoming breeding grounds for terrorism, potentially with access to incredibly dangerous technologies in this high development future.
So the very things that drive the index up, energy use, urban density, interconnectedness, also amplify the potential for catastrophe.
Exactly. It's the paradox writ large. And Morris delivers a really stark warning. The convergence of these crises could lead to, in his words, complete destruction.
Complete destruction. That's chilling. So what's the way out? Or is there one?
His conclusion is pretty unequivocal. No single country, no East or West alone can handle these threats. The old divisions have to end. He argues the next few decades, maybe 40 years from when the book came out, so roughly until mid-century, are absolutely critical.
We have to stop thinking in terms of East versus West.
We have to. Humanity needs to put aside the hostility, the competition, and genuinely work together. It's a race against time, he says. We need a global effort to kickstart an energy revolution, tackle climate change head-on, manage migration humanely, prevent pandemics, and avoid catastrophic conflicts, especially nuclear war. Unity is basically the only survival strategy.
Wow. What a journey this book takes you on. From hunter-gatherers at the end of the Ice Age through these huge civilizational rises and falls, charting the West's lead, then the East's 1,200-year dominance, the West's return powered by coal and ships, and now this prediction for the East to rise again by 2103.
Those convergences he identifies, 541 AD, 1773 AD, and potentially 2103 AD, are such powerful focal points.
But it all leads to this potential sci-fi future that's simultaneously amazing and terrifyingly fragile, shadowed by that risk of total collapse.
Which leaves us with a really fundamental question, doesn't it? Something Morris implies, but maybe doesn't state quite this way. If geography's meaning changes with ingenuity, and progress itself creates these massive risks, this paradox, what's the real ultimate variable? Is it just technology? Or is it something deeper, maybe our collective ability or inability to actually cooperate? To overcome those ancient divisions he traced right back to the hilly flanks and the Yellow River, are we going to manage interdependence, or are we just doomed to repeat these cycles until one breaks us completely?
That really is the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? Whether we can transcend the patterns Morris so brilliantly lays out. Definitely something profound for all of you listening to think about. We highly recommend exploring Ian Morris's work if this has piqued your interest. Understanding this shared history, these deep patterns, feels more urgent than ever.